debate. The honourable member from Charleswood, St. James, Mississinaboia, Headingly.
Amazing colleague, the member from Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola. And I just have to say, Mr. Speaker, what an honor it is to rise on behalf of my constituents, the great people of Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingly. Every day I come here, I think about what we can do as members of Parliament to make their lives just a little bit better. And it's also an honor for me, Mr. Speaker, to serve as a member of the Standing Committee on Finance, where I've been for the most part since I was elected in 2019, with a brief stint along the way on the Foreign Affairs Committee. The members of the Finance Committee serve a vital role as the only opposition party focused on holding this Liberal government to account. Mr. Speaker, people are suffering across this land from coast to coast to coast after 9 years of the most incompetent and out-of-touch government in Canadian history. And that's why I think it's very important to point out the extraordinary display of hypocrisy we just saw unfold in this chamber. Just 2 weeks ago, in the throes of the Elmwood-Transcona by-election, the leader of the NDP got up on his feet in front of the cameras, held up a copy of the coalition agreement and said, "I'm ripping it up. I'm done with the Prime Minister. It's over. The gloves are off." And, I can't help but thinking, Mr. Speaker, that, I think they thought they were going to lose that by-election. And so they knew that the Liberals were dragging them down, and so they got up, the leader got up in front of the cameras, and he said, "I'm ripping up the coalition agreement." And I'll
Order. There seems to be some conversations going on, and I'm not sure what those conversations are about, but I would ask members to please have those conversations out, because it is interrupting the proceedings. The honourable member for... okay.
Just the extraordinary display of hypocrisy that just occurred in this House, never before seen on a level like that in this House, in the history of this country, in the history of this austere chamber. And what happened? He knew he was going down. We had a great candidate. I was on the doors with him many, many, many times. Colin Reynolds, construction electrician, a guy on the executive of his local IBEW union board, who grew up in the area and really connected with the residents. And so he knew he was going to lose that by-election. So what did he do? I said, "I'm ripping it up. I'm done with the Prime Minister." And unfortunately, the people of Elmwood-Transcona, they deserve better. They deserve better than having the leader of the NDP try to fool them into thinking he is a man of principle. However, he is not, and that was established today, Madam Speaker. In front of the entire country, the man who said, "I'm ripping up the agreement," got up and taped it back together, Madam Speaker. He taped it back together and he got up on his feet and he said, "I believe in this Prime Minister. I'm voting with this Prime Minister." In fact, he said, "I have confidence in the Prime Minister." The height of hypocrisy is on a level never, as I said, never ever before seen on the floor of this chamber. And Canadians won't forget it, and the people of Elmwood-Transcona won't forget it come the next election. Now, on the issue of this report, Madam Speaker, as I said, I sit on that committee. Conservatives really are the only members on that committee that are doing their best to hold the government to account. And we had some great ideas for the report that our other colleagues from other parties on the committee would not support. And so for the people watching, we attached a dissenting report to the report, which we're allowed to do, and anyone who wants to look it up online, they can read the dissenting report. But I wanted just to go through some parts of it. But before I do, I also want to just circle back for a second, just to look at part of the Liberal government's record. In 2015, in order to fool Canadians into voting for him, the Prime Minister promised to balance the budget by 2019. And of course, that never happened. In fact, he doubled the national debt in 9 years. That's right, it doubled. It's hard to get your head around that, for people to get their heads around that, Madam Speaker, but just to put it in perspective, in 2015, when the Prime Minister first was elected to office, the national debt was $616 billion. Today, it's over $1.2 trillion. He has spent more in debt than all other prime ministers from 1867 to today combined. Today, the interest on that debt is $52 billion a year, more than we spend on health care, more than we spend on defense, and in fact, more than we actually collect in the GST. And so it's important for people watching to know that when they go out and they buy something in the store, and the store adds on the GST, that money is going directly to paying the interest on the massive historic debt that this Prime Minister has managed to rack up. And so at committee, Conservatives made a number of common sense recommendations that were rejected by the NDP and Liberal members. And one of the recommendations we made at committee, Madam Speaker, which we had hoped would be a recommendation in the report, was to axe the carbon tax. And the reason we wanted to axe the carbon tax is pretty straightforward, and I'll go through some of those points, Madam Speaker. You know, we had, for example, the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, who came to committee and told us that the carbon taxes are inflationary, and that by cutting the carbon tax, inflation would come down by 0.6%, bringing CPI back into the bank's target range. Now, the government has had an opportunity to start with the government has an opportunity now to start with a carbon tax on farmers. Our common sense conservative Bill C-234 should be passed immediately in its original form to take the tax off farmers to help lower food prices. And I know it's been said many, many times in this House, but you know, when you tax the farmer that produces the food, and you tax the trucker that ships the food, and you tax the grocer who stocks the food costs more. And what's the result? 2 million Canadians lining up at food banks. Historic numbers of homeless encampments across this country. You know, Madam Speaker, just last year as part of the Finance Committee's, or earlier this year as part of the Finance Committee's housing study, we had Mayor Cam Guthrie from Guelph at committee, and I asked him, I said, he was elected in 2014. I said, the year you were elected, Mayor Guthrie, how many homeless encampments were there in Guelph? He said, 0. I said, well, how many are there today? He said, 20. That's just one example. And I made a speech about this the other day in the House, and I went through the litany of housing hell stories across this country as a result of the apocalyptic, terrible, historically terrible housing policies of this Liberal government. Never before, $82 billion on the National Housing Strategy, never before has so much been spent to achieve so little, Madam Speaker. It's time to axe the failed and inflationary carbon tax that makes gas, groceries, and home heating more expensive, and to bring down inflation so that Canadians can once again earn powerful paychecks so that they can afford nutritious food and a home in a safe neighborhood. It seems like a simple ask, part of the Canadian dream, but that dream has been broken by the failed policies of this Liberal government. And we said there should be we said to axe the tax, and we also talked about building more homes. Madam Speaker. There's a housing crisis in this country. Time flies when you're having fun. I see I'm just down to 1 minute. Thank you, Madam Speaker. We need to build more homes in this country. Again, we have a housing crisis. We have an affordability crisis. We need to build millions of homes, and the Liberals and the NDP voted against our common sense conservative bill, the Building Homes Not Bureaucracy Act. They voted against it, a bill that would have got those houses built, but instead they just got in the way. They are the gatekeepers of this House of Commons. They got in the way of a common sense bill that would help Canadians, and of course we need to fix the budget and we need to stop the crime. Let's bring it home, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, you know, as we're listening, the Conservatives never missed the opportunity to actually work for Canadians, Madam Speaker. We were supposed to be discussing Bill C-71 tonight, which is Lost Canadians. Those that this Conservative government, when they were in power, actually stripped the ability of Canadians to retain or gain their citizenship. And I actually wanted to debate this bill tonight because it affects my daughter, who was born abroad and has lived here all of her life, in actually ensuring that her children have Canadian citizenship. So I asked the member, why is it that we have to hear the same slogans over and over and over again, rather than doing the work that we're doing on this side of the House for Canadians?
The Honourable Member Charles Wood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Well, I will agree with the member on one point. She said that Conservatives never cease to work for Canadians, and in fact, that is absolutely correct. We will never cease to work for Canadians, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. And I will take no lessons from a member who literally was holding hands with Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah less than a year ago after what happened on October 7th.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to congratulate my colleague for their speech and all the work he does at the Finance Committee. Well, we're talking about the pre-budgetary consultation report that was printed last February. Well, then there was the government budget, and I'd like to ask my colleague if he finds the budget presented last spring did it really reflect what we heard at the consultations and the report we presented?
Assiniboia, Headingley.
Well, as I said, Conservatives tabled a dissenting report, and that report was based on testimony that we heard from many witnesses at committee that said that the carbon tax was just a terrible policy that was making life harder for everyone, that we needed to take tangible steps to build more homes, that the budget was out of control, and in fact the budgetary spending was the actual cause for spiking inflation and making everything more expensive for everyone. And we heard testimony that we needed to bring in things like mandatory minimum sentences and consecutive sentences in order to help stem the tide of crime in this country. So the reason those things are in a dissenting report is for the very reason my colleague mentions, is that our colleagues in the Liberal and NDP party on the committee would not agree to listen to what the witnesses said.
And comments? The Honourable Member for Courtenay Albany. Oh, sorry, I have a point of order. The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Madam Chair, thank you. I'd like to take a point of personal privilege with regards to the member and his comments to me. With regards to my government work that I did abroad, I am a Canadian citizen and an Israeli citizen who's dedicated my life to 30 years in peace building. And he took
yeah. I would just say that is more a point of debate than it is a point of privilege. The Honourable Member, point of order, the Honourable Member for Courtenay Albany.
I think actually the minister has a point, that she simply asked the member a question in relation to what he said on the floor of the House of Commons, and he went and took the time to insult my colleague. That is totally unacceptable, Madam Speaker, and it should be that he should be apologizing to the House.
Sorry, this is all part of debate, and I do want to remind members to be careful on the wording. This has caused a bit of disorder, and so I just want to remind members to please be careful on what they're saying in the House. I'm sorry, I don't recognize individuals that are not in their chairs. So now we go to questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Courtenay Albany.
colleague talked about the by-election in Elmo-Transcona, and he talked about small business people. Madam Speaker, for 7 years, the NDP led the charge to cap credit card merchants' fees and forced this government to do something. The Conservatives, Madam Speaker, they sat silent for 7 years while small business people paid some of the highest credit card fees in the world, Madam Speaker. Layla Dance, who won Elmo-Transcona, who ran the Transcona Business Improvement Association, the reason she won is because small business people saw right through the fact that the Conservatives are actually just there for big corporations, Madam Speaker. So my question through you is, why were the Conservatives silent and standing up for Visa and MasterCard instead of small business owners in this country?
Honourable member for Charleswood St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
That's pretty rich, Madam Speaker, from a member whose party voted with a government that spiked inflation higher than it's ever been before, quicker than it's ever been before, making everything more expensive. And as much as they like to talk about how inflation has come down to the 2% target, the damage has been done. Everything is more expensive. So good on him for taking on credit card interest, but the reality is that the policies he supported were seriously detrimental to affordability in this country, and Canadians are suffering now because of that. Wow.